The April 4th. We will call the April 14th meeting of the Housing and Human Services Advisory Board to order. First item on the agenda is public invited to be heard. I don't see anyone virtually. Do we have anyone who has shown up in person or might be waiting?
No, we don't.
I was kind of scared that Karen Roney was going to show up.
You should always be scared.
It's always a possibility, Eliberto.
Love to have her here.
Right.
All right. Next item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from our March 10th meeting. Do we have a motion to approve those?
Motion to approve.
Okay. Graham and then Deanna is seconding. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Graham, or I can't tell if you all are raising your hands or not.
I'm going to abstain.
Okay.
I haven't read them and I wasn't there.
Okay. And great. So that's 5. 1 abstention. Robert, do you want to vote yay, nay, abstain on this one? Okay, we may not actually.
Oh, there he is.
There you are. Are you a yes? No? Okay.
All right.
So Robert votes yes, so we have 6, 4, and 1 abstention. All right, they are so approved. The next item is a continued discussion around our 2023 funding process. Eliberto, I will turn it over to you for this one.
Well, and that gives me the opportunity and privilege and honor to introduce Michelle Waite. Michelle Waite is the Senior Services Director and right now the Co-Director of Community Services. And Michelle is going to lead a facilitated discussion so that I can participate as well. We are going to continue continue going on through the questions that we have been working on for a few months now, hopefully trying to get closer to a resolution as we get closer to opening up our fund round. So with that, I turn over to Michelle.
Okay, thank you. Hi. So Eliberto shared with me some information. So it looks like there were 2 basic unintended realities. And if there are others, we can certainly look at them, but I thought we'll take them one by one. The first one was a difficulty in achieving funding for the highest priority areas. It sounds like a couple of the things that you all identified was the number of agencies applying impacts that, as well as that agencies are not necessarily aware of how much they can ask for. Were there any other specifics that really were your examples of why this is an issue, an unintended reality, a difficulty in achieving funding of those highest priority areas?
The quantity of applicants for a given temporary area.
So there are too many?
Is that
Not enough.
Not enough.
Yep. There are not very many for our highest priority areas, and there are quite a few for some of our lower priority areas.
Right, so the number of agencies applying is really that there isn't enough.
Right.
Okay, and agencies are unaware of what they can ask for. Okay.
Well, the board has never given direction to agencies on what they can apply for.
Okay. All right, there's no other specifics around that unintended reality that you want to just call out? I didn't see any, but just to double check.
I remember one.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Stacy, sorry.
I remember one from last week. One of the problems is that some of the smaller organizations didn't score as high on their applications. So they were also, and we, again, presumed that they didn't have grant writing departments and the resources to do the same sorts of quality applications as some of the bigger ones, some of the bigger organizations did. So consequently, they were receiving lower amounts. Receiving lower scores and therefore receiving either lower amounts and or no amounts.
Well, in reference to that, I feel like some of the smaller agencies from the board received good, high scores, but often it was the staff score that they were lower on, because I think their ability to have some of the resources to have like the board documentation in place, or a document retention plan, those kinds of things, is lower for those small agencies. I almost wonder if there was kind of like an accelerated scale depending on the size for some of that staff evaluation.
Like a multiple tier type of thing.
Yeah, right.
So the smaller agencies lack grant writing and other resources that puts them into a competitive arena.
Right.
So they have lower scores, therefore they get lower money. Okay.
Right.
I think we also see that, the idea of like agencies don't know what to apply for. We see some of the smaller agencies that do get consistently funded. They're not actually asking for that much relative to their budgets. So I think one that often comes up is, I think EFA does tends to do fairly well in scoring, but they pretty consistently apply for, I think, like $16,000, which in the realm of their entire budget and the work that they do in our community is a really small drop. And so it's sort of like, okay, well, you're doing really well. We actually would give you more money because this is actually, the work you're doing is really important.
So is that part of this? Agencies are unaware of what they can ask for?
Yes.
Right. Well, and it leads into disparities, because then you have outliers that, they apply for a lot.
Right.
And then, you get these huge disparities.
Okay. So one of the recommendations that I saw in the material Alberto sent me was a possible recommendation was to announce a set percentage of the entire amount available per each of those six priority areas.
Right. So this was Kimberly and Karen's suggestion in our last meeting about, if the board has a percentage that we have assigned from the overall total, then we announce that and say, this is how much we plan to spend in each of the 6 buckets, right? And then we have to figure out, Karen talked about points, Kimberly talked about rankings. We'd have to figure that out. That's one of the suggestions that we've thrown out.
So it's assign and announce a percentage.
Right.
To each priority is what you just said.
So basically agencies know we have, I forget what number, we threw out a number, but it doesn't matter.
Can you give an example? So one of the priority areas is
housing stability.
Housing stability.
And let's say we're gonna give 350,000 to that, right?
Yeah, I think, Alberto, to that point, one of the things we talked about is we may not know the exact amount when we do the initial announcement, but to say,
right.
We expect the total to be approximately,
right.
I think it was like 1.1 million or something like that. And 25% of that would be allocated. So approximately X number of dollars to housing stability, which includes the following things.
Right. And we would put those caveats in there, Caitlin. I think that's exactly right. We would say, this is what we expect, this is what it was in 2022. This is how we estimate we will have this amount of money. So yes, that's one of the suggestions, to announce that.
So that recommendation would answer number 2. Agencies are unaware of what they can ask for in one way, but not in a complete way.
Well, and that's the other recommendation that we've talked about, and that is adding ceilings and floors. And actually, I heard a new one recently. I reached out to a mentor, and he said, have you all ever thought about averages? He said, have you ever thought about saying, okay, so let's take housing stability, right? So EFA asked for 16, but our outliers ask for 100 or more. What if you average it out and you can still give the ceiling and floor, you can still give, and you could throw a statement like, and the average amount is X. And all of this would go in the application guide and in our, potentially in our press release or whatever that we do. That's a brand new idea I'm throwing out there that Jim Adamsberger told me.
So any questions for Alberto about the averages piece or any other thoughts about ceilings and floors?
Would the ceiling clarify that though there's 350K allocated for the housing stability, we will only fund to a certain percent?
We could do percent, we could do amount. Yeah, I mean, the numbers that Karen and I gave you were numbers that we took the outliers, right? So 100 grand is what one of our agencies has been getting for quite some time, right? So we said that was the ceiling for housing stability. It could be less, could be more. I think the board could decide what the ceiling and the floor could be.
And the average, if you decide.
Well, the average is the average of what we
of historical.
Yeah.
Right.
And in the past, we have capped any agency at 50% of the amount allocated for a funding area. So if there was 300,000 allocated to housing stability, because that was the 25% of our total, then no one agency could get more than 150,000.
Correct.
So that's your pass ceiling.
That's the pass ceiling. Exactly. Yes.
Was 50% of the total.
Yes.
And have you made that clear?
No.
No.
So it goes back to this announce thing?
Right.
Correct.
Yes, we have never announced it. The board has never wanted, part of it, I think, is the board has shied away from trying to tell folks, how much to apply for. But I think if we see how we want housing to be a priority, we're not telling them what to apply for, but we're giving them, guidelines.
Some parameters.
Some parameters.
The positive side of doing that is that it encourages people to think about what they could do with, those dollars.
Right.
The challenging side is that it encourages people to think about what they could do with those dollars. Right? So they'll be like, because some people, they see the limit and they just go for the fences.
Right? That was Karen's concern with ceilings. Is if you tell them there's a ceiling, everybody's applying for the ceiling.
Well, it puts more pressure on you all.
Right.
Right.
And I think
that
that's
evaluation
exactly
piece.
Right.
I think
so where do you want the pressure?
Yeah, and I was gonna say, I think the one thing about that though is like, yes, it encourages folks to shoot for that ceiling, but it also potentially means that we get more program ideas and things that potentially address our concerns, and then we actually can determine what the best use of that money is. Whereas right now, in large part, it ends up being like, essentially, it comes down to how stable is the agency and therefore what percentage of their requests do we give them, rather than these are the 3 top programs that we should fund because they are fully addressing the need.
So are there other recommendations regarding the difficulty in achieving funding of your highest priority areas? Any other recommendations on how to address that?
Well, I would just say if we do make it transparent, that I think we really need to dig into the evaluation and the application and understand which questions are really going to help us suss out who can actually meet what they're asking for versus who is just asking for it because they know they can.
Right, and that's on our side. That's on the board's side to figure out.
That's right.
Yeah. So I think, Michelle, to your question about the other ideas, I think we have gone through some different ideas of what the ceilings could be. So there was some discussion about setting a ceiling in part based on the agency's budget. So you couldn't request more than a certain amount of a certain percentage of the budget, and also putting a floor, like, the overhead of administering a grant of $1,000 is just too much, given that it's $1,000. So like a minimum request. When we kind of ran the numbers, it didn't really end up like the way that we were distinguishing it didn't end up making a whole lot of sense, in the sense that a lot of agencies actually have fairly large budgets, relatively. So a lot of them were falling into the same category. It just didn't give us much of a distinction between them in a meaningful way from what we could tell.
So if you decide to move forward with ceilings, floors, and perhaps averages, that's your next work, is decide how you're going to just set those. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. So first you need to decide that's a control factor you want to apply to meet that unintended reality. So right now you have two recommendations: assign and announce a percentage to each priority of your 6 priority areas, and look at ceiling, floors, or perhaps averages and announce those as well, or not. So, and then what I heard was, regardless, there's a burden that falls on you all in your evaluation that has to be factored into that.
That's correct.
So I think this is where I step out and ask, do you need to do motions? What's your process? So,
well, no, we're not taking any, well,
we're not, so
Caitlin, I mean, do we need a motion? I mean, typically so what usually happens from here is, if we have recommendations, then board recommends to me, now, just me, to go back and create scenarios, bring back wording around the transparency piece, and then the board gets this. Then we vote that this is how we're going to proceed.
Okay.
So, I guess the question I have at this point, and I'm kind of curious, and I don't necessarily think this is a vote, but I'd love to actually hear from everybody. Michelle, I think you did a really good job of laying out the fact that, ultimately we're trying to solve for the difficulty in funding our highest priority areas, with those two realities of, like, agencies don't know what to apply for. We don't necessarily have enough agencies applying in those priority areas. So I guess my question is, do we think that having just even just starting with the transparency piece, not getting into what those limits or things are, does that help us solve, or is that like a good solution for this unintended reality? Does that get us closer to solving, our difficulty in funding these higher priority areas?
I would say yes. I think that there's a pattern of behavior that our organizations have fallen into over the years. And we have to break that pattern somehow, and this would break it. I don't know what the outcomes will be, but I know what the outcome will be if we don't try to do something different. We're going to continue to have the same issue.
So do you want to hear from everyone?
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
So let's just do a round. So Deanna?
Generally, I'm just a big proponent of transparency. And I think that Brian's right, that we need to shake it loose a little bit. And I'm thinking maybe the averages component is a nice way to go, to give people an idea of where things have sort of historically ended up, without encouraging them to necessarily swing for the fences and totally blowing our budget. I don't know if that's transparent enough, but I think it might get us partway there without creating that secondary problem of telling people how high they can go. I don't know.
Kimberly or Stacy or Robert? I'm looking up there. Yeah. Graham.
I think it's a great idea. I really like the idea of prioritizing the money based on the priorities. And so breaking it down by percentages just makes a lot of sense to me. And then I would be curious to see if maybe there were some innovative programs that came from this transparency, maybe organizations that have been working on the side with some of our higher priority areas. And when they see that the money is flowing to those types of projects, they might be more likely to strengthen existing programs that they may not have put a lot of work into, but that motivation might develop them further.
So if you just want to do a thumbs up on moving this forward, or if you want to add to it, it sounds like Caitlin's interested in getting engaged.
Stacy.
So I'm on board also with the averages and mixing it up, and certainly prioritizing the money, putting the larger blocks of money where our priorities are. The only thing I worry a little bit about is every scenario we looked at last month surpassed the budget. So we really have to be careful on the back end that we're not building an algorithm that is going to blow the budget. That would be my only concern.
Robert or Graham, do either of you have thoughts that you want to share?
I think the transparency will help the difficulty achieving high priority funding. I don't think it's going to help the small agencies that lack grant writing capacity. And that problem may not be solved in the algorithm, but in the application review process. And I think that's important to flag and maybe revisit it another time, that we're not penalizing organizations for being bad at grant writing, rather than filtering for organizations that can effectively leverage the money, which I think are two different skills. So.
Robert, I want to make sure if you've got anything that you're able to do that.
I was thinking, with my own budget, for example, I donate money to a lot of charities, and I generally budget a certain amount of money that I'm going to spend to these charities. The problem is you can't be fair. Do you give a little bit to a lot of different places that you like, or do you give a lot to one or two that is very useful or beneficial? It is such a complicated decision, and essentially you can't be fair. You just have to say, I just like this group, and I don't care too much about saving apes in Africa or something like that. You know what I'm saying? And so you end up making a decision, not that's fair or balanced, or even based on some kind of formula or algorithm. You do it because you feel that this is a useful program, or it's one that grabs your heartstrings or something. I don't know. And I get the feeling that's what we're dealing with here, is we've got a limited amount of money. We have all these places that need money and could use the money, and yet we have to cut back and we have to do this and that. And I keep thinking that spending a little bit of money to all the places you like is kind of a waste, because you could do more good by putting more money in a fewer number of places. That's all I'm saying.
So it seems like you have your priorities given to you by council.
Well, yeah, I was thinking, can I address that?
Yeah.
That's a great point, Robert. And actually, I gotta admit, folks, I cheated. I called Karen on Wednesday. I said, Karen, I need to talk through this. I called Jim and Karen, my two they're my two big brains that when I think through things, I called. And so and she reminded me, and she said, you should remind the board that, Robert, to your point, we are not doing this out of what we like or feel. We are doing this based on a couple of things. One is, and I think most importantly, on the human services needs assessment, where we did the work, and this board was a part of that work of asking our community, what are the human services that we need to prioritize with this funding? So those 6 buckets have been consistently the buckets that have been selected by our community. So it's not we like this or we like that. And then 2, she reminded me that we have a council, or we've had a council that wants us to look at performance and outcomes, not just, we like this agency or not. And that is part of the challenge. And I think to Graham's point, we do have to have a separate conversation about smaller organizations. We do want to look at their ability to perform, their ability to provide, to deliver outcomes that this board has been basically made stewards of, right? This money, you're stewards of this money to get the best outcomes for the residents of the city of Longmont. So that was my conversation with Karen. And I do think, Graham, that your point, it is a separate conversation that we don't necessarily have to have tonight, but I think we should.
And what I heard Graham say is that is something you could build into your evaluation. If you are going to make that evaluation a little more rigorous, or you're going to look at that a little differently, that could be an element that you put in there. How will they be able to meet that need, and what do they need to meet that need? And I think fair and equitable is a great conversation to have because they're different. But it's fair and equitable to the purpose that you've been given and the assignments that you have to follow. So not fair and equitable to your own choices, right? You have some analysis there. So, okay. I
think to kind of build on what Robert was saying is like, if you just came in and said, is this a fair distribution? It probably wouldn't look that way. We have priorities and we have parameters that we're working within in terms of what our priorities are as the board. To sort of take the analogy, in my personal donations, I have certain things that, I may not care about the, saving the apes in Africa or whatever that is. I've decided and in some ways that can feel arbitrary and unfair in the sense, but in our case, it's because we are stewards of that money for the city. And so the city has helped set those boundaries for us and what those like parameters are. And that's okay. It's okay to say no to things that don't match those priorities, even if it doesn't feel fair.
So I was not at your last meeting, and I don't want to belabor things you've already hashed over. Is this one feel done enough for tonight? This unintended reality discussion.
It seems like it to me, unless other folks want to contribute something. I feel like we've heard from everybody, and it sounds like that there's a lot in favor of being transparent. And then the real question then becomes like, okay, what does that look like? And how do we move forward with that?
And that's my job to bring it back to you all, and so you guys can see what I'm thinking and then give your input, and we can move from there.
Okay, so the second unintended reality was the disparities in the amount that the agencies asked for. The examples were that new agencies sometimes get more money than agencies you funded a longer period of time. And some agencies just ask big, they just go for it, right? So there were several recommendations that came out from some of the material, but before we jump to that, are there any other factors or examples that need to be called out relative to the disparities in the amount that agencies ask for?
I think the only thing I would say is because agencies ask big, it really throws off. So we always have a goal of spending. We've been setting the percentages. The board sets the percentages every year, and every year we miss our goal because of the numbers. For example, education and skill building. There are so many providers and so many asking big that they always blow their budget. And if it was a budget, if we were to say, this is the percentage we assign, they blow it through it every year.
The board blows through it? Who blows through it?
Well, the way that when we allocate the funding, so the board sets, we said 25% for housing stability. We set that every year.
Right.
We never get there. With housing stability, we're always short, and we say 17% for education and skill building, because that's the list of our priorities. And then we end up spending 20% of our funding on education and skill building.
Yeah. Because not enough people ask for enough money in the higher priority.
Right. Okay. And more people ask in the lower priority.
So one thing I would say, and I no longer represent one of those agencies that swings for the fences. So I feel comfortable saying this. I do think we have to be careful that some agencies, we should expect the benefit delivery to be proportional to the ask. Right, so I see your confusion, Graham, so I'll try to be a little more articulate on this. Somebody having a big ask is not necessarily a bad thing. It's not that they're greedy. If they can deliver a big benefit.
Yeah.
Now, if we want to say, look, nobody should ask for more than this, because that's just greedy and I don't care what you deliver. That's okay, but we need to be clear on what we're asking.
I think that's an interesting point in that we only dug into it a little bit in the hearings last year, but it's something that I feel like we should, as part of our evaluation, is looking at, we have some agencies that, Brian, to go back to the agency that you previously, were associated with, asked for a lot of money, but also hit, thousands of residents in Longmont, relative to some of our smaller agencies that were asking for smaller amounts and maybe hit 100 residents in Longmont. That's a huge difference, right? When you can provide, food and groceries to, several hundred families versus, less than 100. Though that's a huge difference in terms of what is being delivered to our community.
So I captured Brian's comment under a heading called evaluation criteria. That's really what you're talking about.
I will say this is where it becomes, this is where I hate to be in your shoes, because I don't measure this in my evaluation. That is a very subjective, what's more valuable, having food or having housing?
Well, that we set in our priority, our funding. We say we're going to give more to housing because we know that's a higher priority and less to food. But within any specific category, like where our center plays is another one that typically asks for a healthy chunk.
Yeah,
they serve a lot of people.
Right, they do.
So the cost of service per person may be much lower than a smaller agency that appears to be asking for a right-sized amount, but actually has a much higher service cost per person.
I think about, for example, I think last year we had the medicine horse program applied for funding, and relatively, the cost per person served was relatively high. The flip side of that is it's a fairly unique program that is addressing a fairly niche need that, sort of the lower cost programs potentially don't address. The reason they exist is because the typical therapy, some of the mental health services don't address some of the needs of kids with certain kids with trauma. And so the cost of service is higher, but it's addressing that. And so, but we don't really get into a lot of that in terms of how we evaluate it.
So the issue is we are dealing with used cars that have no foundation in their value, right? It's just all over the place where we act like we're dealing in new cars where we know what the value is. And, that's what the formula hopes to do, is treat everything like like there's a known benchmark, but we have no known. I mean, to your point, it's like, what's it cost to deliver those niche services? It's probably going to be higher, and they're valuable services.
So that's probably a future but soon discussion around evaluation.
All year long.
All year long. Okay, so to that point that you just raised, there are too many agencies in some priority areas.
That's very, very true. That is very true.
I think what you just said.
I don't know who said it, but that is very true.
Yeah.
And we have so many in.
Well, it could be so many, not too many. Two is probably.
Right, well, we have, we have quite a bit in our educational, trying to think what's the other one.
It's education and skill building and the, I'm totally blanking on the other one.
Yeah, I think health and well-being maybe.
Yeah,
quite a bit.
maybe.
Graham, were you going to say something? You think?
Yeah, I've got a question and a comment, and one is to say it's dawning on me, maybe I'm just slow, that of course our highest priority areas would have the biggest struggle in funding and the least applicants because it's the highest priority area. Like it's where the biggest need is because there's less resources and people to mobilize the funds. So the lower priority areas would have an excess amount of agencies and you're always funding them. And so it's actually, it may be an unintended reality, but it's kind of a predictable outcome. And so in too many agencies in some priority. So, I mean, I guess we could, the thought is to address this, to encourage with the money further funding in those higher priority areas, I guess, somehow. And that could attract some organizations to mobilize resources for programs in higher priority areas.
So encourage more money, resources in the higher priority areas.
Yes.
When we say higher priority areas, are we really talking about housing?
Yes.
Well, so a couple of things. One, you all said, which I mean, you did in 20, you the board have always set your priorities. Every year I come before you and say, here are the priorities, here's what the human service needs assessment says, and then you all decide, okay, so these are our, based on what we're hearing or what we're seeing, these are the areas that we want to prioritize. And so far, and I think rightly so, there has been some shifts, right? So we shifted last year, food and nutrition was higher, and we heard from folks saying, hey, we're getting food, but we can't find jobs, or the pandemic has occurred, and so we moved self-sufficiency above food. But consistently, we've heard housing stabilization programs that help keep people, their housing is king, right? That is or queen, or whatever, top.
The reason I ask is because housing is an incredibly capital intensive. The cost of entry into housing is incredibly high versus like I'm going to start a service, out of my house and build it from there.
Right.
So it would naturally have very few applicants, and I'm really hot on the analogies or metaphors tonight. So really, what we do is we go fishing, right? We put some bait on the hook and we throw it out there, and we hope that some fish swim. And we're talking about like maybe there's some better bait we could be using, like transparency, letting them know. In some of these areas, I wonder if we need to go hunting, which is like actively going out there and engaging agencies and saying, in housing, for instance, and saying, look, you potentially are a good fit for this. You have services that could be valuable. Consider applying, right? We have to be a little more active.
I think also, like, if we've got a lot of agencies that are, for example, I think about education and skill building. That is a very broad thing, but there are some of the agencies that like self-identify into that, and the way they do it, like they have, a number of programs. But if they applied for a program that was specifically around, helping people achieve housing stability, like, and had a very direct impact on that, or they could make the connection there, then we could put them into that housing stability piece. But, it sort of goes back to that transparency of saying, this is the priority. And this is where, if we said last year we had 3 applicants for housing stability, like that might be a signal too of like, hey, there's room here for somebody who hasn't applied for housing stability before, but provides something that contributes to it, to apply for that program instead of this other program that's, would fit into a lower priority area.
So relative to the unintended reality of disparities in the amount that agencies ask for, new agencies get more money than new to the process, right? Agencies have gotten more money than others who've been in the system. Some agencies know how and just ask big. And some areas, they're just a lot of agencies. So one of the recommendations is to encourage more resources for the higher priority areas. The other recommendations I know you came up with, it sounds like in an earlier meeting, were some similar to some of the ones we talked about here, but looking at the ceilings and floors, are they the correct ones? Do you have ceilings and floors? You do some adjustments in ceilings and floors. Is there any interest in looking at how you score new or unproven agencies differently, perhaps? Is that a recommendation you'd like to consider further? And then the increased rigor in the evaluation process. So, thoughts about those recommendations. We heard one, encourage more resources in higher priority areas. So do you think ceiling and floors, if you really look at that more specifically, would help address this unintended reality as well? Is ceilings and floors something that would help with this area?
Can I make a comment about the ceilings and floors? If we remember back to last month, every time we tried to apply a ceiling or a floor, we blew the budget. I really think we have to go back to percentages. Say, if we want housing to be 30%, we fit those 3 people into 30% of the budget, because we have to start with the maximum of the budget, not with a ceiling or a floor. So I think if we can fit people into percentages that we predetermine, then we can both meet the budget. They won't necessarily get what they asked for. They might even get more. But that way we can allocate how much money we can give out and still stay within our number.
And Kimberly, did you
agree with Stacy?
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Robert, go ahead. And then Kimberly, you had your hand raised a minute ago, so I want to make sure we come back to you. Go ahead, Robert. Were you just saying you agree with Stacy, Robert?
I'm just saying I agree that percentages sounds like the right way to go. The thing about being new to the board, I'm kind of an amateur at this, but it strikes me that it's a very open-ended operation. In other words, you're constantly looking for more places to fund. And I suspect you're adding more than you're actually dropping. And it reminds me of the farmer with 100 acres with 10 children. And he dies, and each child gets 10 acres, and then they have children, and eventually everybody inherits 1 acre, or 1 meter maybe. And it would seem maybe you have to limit the total number of agencies that you're servicing, that it can't be open. It can't go from 50 to 60 to 70. That's another problem, I think, is that as it gets bigger, everybody gets less, like the farmer with his land.
Kimberly.
These remarks are kind of tardy because it was kind of expounding on what you said, Caitlin, about how there were only 3 agencies that applied for housing. And I was just thinking EFA and our center both have sub-programs that are related to housing. I don't remember if they were among the 3, but I can see where that motivation to apply for housing would come from those larger agencies that have their hands in a lot of different areas. And then I just wanted to add, going to the idea of percentages, I think the challenge with that is we don't know how many agencies will apply before we determine what percentage of the pot they're going to get. So that's where I think the idea of an average, a historical average of what people have received might be helpful. And that would also take maybe some forecasting of how many people we think might apply based off, and then taking into account what percentage of the total bucket we would be allocating for those organizations. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think we're working in the dark and really in terms of numbers until we know how many people apply. So an average makes more sense in my mind.
So relative to the disparities in the amount that agencies ask for, there's two recommendations on the table. One is to encourage more resources in the higher priority area. And the other one is back to looking at percentages versus averages versus ceilings and floors.
And I can come back with both of those scenarios for you all to look at. I have never done the averages, but I can go back and do averages, and then we can percentage are a little more kind of like the ceilings and floors, since you just throw out a number, 50%, 30%, 25%. We just choose.
And I think, you know, we already talked about putting some caveats on it. We can, I don't think there's anything wrong with us saying like, here, we expect our total pot to be this. We expect approximately this much to be, you know, 25% to be for housing stability, and then see what comes in and make adjustments to that. Like, we don't have to tie ourselves to that. Like, we could adjust that. Like, if it comes in and we actually get, you know, a bunch of really strong things on housing stability and it goes over, we could make that adjustment if it makes sense to do it. We could also do things like take the scores and figure out like what the distribution of them is. Like, I think the board tends to score fairly high. Staff scores tend to be more spread out. So we could actually look at that and see like, okay, if we do this, this is what, you know, where we come in terms of our budget. You know, if we fund it at 75% below this, which we've done in the past. And I think that's okay. Our goal is to essentially not use, I don't think we want to go into scoring agencies or evaluating them. Like, we want that to be somewhat divorced from they're going to get X percent of it. Like, we want actually to score them on the scale that we have.
They want to score them on their performance and what they're going to deliver, right?
Right.
To Brian's point earlier.
So Caitlin, what I heard you say is that, and it seems like there is some universal agreement that those percentages, those dollars, those priority area, the ceilings and floors, there is a desire among you all to let that be more known. And then what I heard Caitlin say is that let it be known, but with the caveat that there could be adjustments. Until you know what you're looking at, you're reserving the right to make some tweaks in that. Yeah. And is that comfortable with everybody? Is that, did I hear you right, Caitlin? Maybe I didn't.
Yeah, I mean, I don't expect us to like upturn the you know, the priorities. Right. The fact is we've actually done that before because of where the applications have fallen, and wanting to, you know, allocate all of our funding. But so I don't expect us to like completely reverse it, but I don't think we should feel like we have to get like to the dollar exactly what we predicted, you know, what we said, because number one, our budget might actually be different than what we think. And if our applications look different, then we can evaluate it based on that as well, and make tweaks. I would say that that's a like adjustment, not a like rethinking of the whole thing.
It's a tweak.
It's a tweak. It is not a like a rewrite.
Okay. So the other recommendation relative to this unintended reality that I read was, are you interested in a conversation on how you score or address new unproven agencies?
Right, and I think the answer is yes, and I don't think it has to happen tonight. I think
is that a universal yes? And do you feel like you already said that as a group? That I missed that. So
I'm a yes. Graham's a yes.
Deanne, Caitlin, yes. Okay.
I'm not sure I understand what the issue is, just because I haven't been through this before. So I'm going to abstain from this isn't a formal vote, but I'm unclear what the issue is with evaluating new agencies versus agencies that have been getting money before.
You are clear or you're not clear?
I'm unclear.
Got it. So I think and Aliberto, correct me if I'm wrong here, because you would know, at least on the staff side, their evaluation is really looking at the agency as a whole and like what is their budget? How well do they adhere to their own board rules? What does, it's sort of broadly like how fiscally responsible are they? I don't know all the things, I can't remember all of the things that go into it, but the idea is really like evaluating like if the city is giving you money, how well are you going to steward it? Obviously, smaller agencies have fewer staff. They may not have a treasurer or a bookkeeper. They might have someone who's wearing 4 hats. And
right, so we look at the business side, Stacy. So we look at to Candace's point, is like, do they have 3 months of reserve, which are best practices for nonprofits? My big one, I mean, Karen and we didn't always agree. My big one is I don't want to see a program request that has Longmont. And my rule of thumb typically was, I don't want to see a program request that has Longmont over 20%. If Longmont is funding your program more than 20% of the program cost, that's an issue to me, and I'm going to score you low, right? Longmont should be part of your funding. It should not be a very large part of the funding. Because what that tells me that you, as an agency, are not, going out there and finding the support you need to move your program forward.
Okay, so these are issues above and beyond the application, and each of our organizations that are currently receiving money have gone through this at some point.
It's in the application.
Okay. Oh, it is in the application. Okay.
Yes.
So they have to provide copies of like their information about like board demographics, essentially their overall budget, where the program budget fits in, and that sort of thing.
Okay, but I guess I'm not understanding, because everybody felt pretty strong about evaluating the first timers. Is this above and beyond the application?
No, I think the idea is like with the existing agencies, we sort of have a history. And so we actually know whether they can perform or not. Okay. Whereas with new agencies, if we're actually looking at them identically, just based on the applications, we're actually missing a big piece of information for new agencies that are applying, because we actually don't know how well they will deliver. We can go based on their finances, but there's still an open question of like, can they actually meet the city's needs? Whereas like the Hour Center has been applying for funds for years and years and years. And we know that they're pretty darn good at delivering what they say they're going to deliver. So there's not really a question about that.
Okay. So I just needed a little background. So thank you. That's fine.
Yeah. So it sounds like fiscal responsibility is something you really assign to everybody. But a new agency doesn't have that history.
Or they don't have the capacity.
And they don't have a performance history with you.
Right. So the board evaluates performance. The board evaluates appropriateness of the program to our priorities.
But those are things you apply to all the
everybody gets applied to.
So the unique one to unproven new agencies is really about their performance history.
Right.
And go ahead. Yeah.
I would add to that. I think it goes a little bit deeper. We have some organizations like Medicine Force or Queer Asterisk that are kind of doing a more innovative, non-traditional service. And so we have questions that we rate the organizations on, like, is their model based on evidence-based practices? And so if you're looking at organizations that's doing something creative or unique, they're not going to have a historical precedence, or they're not going to have evidence-based research to sort of support the model that they're operating with. And they may even be sort of a non-analytic model. So our application process and its evaluation process is very analytical, right? It's very process-oriented. Are you sending surveys that are all the same, and are you measuring the outcome, and then are you making adjustments and then tweaking your service? Well, you ask an organization like Queer Asterisk these questions, they're going to go, well, what are you talking about? We're like mindful based. We're from Naropa. Like each service that we provide when we do telehealth, counseling is unique, and that's the way it's supposed to be. So when you, Longmont, are asking me to sort of like put my program into this very analytic sort of cookie cutter model, it's not right or it's not fair. Of course, they haven't said this, but I get the sense that sort of some organizations, they're just not built the way that our traditional sort of allocation is meant to filter. And so people are falling through the cracks in some regard. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's Longmont doesn't want to risk money on an unproven, untraditional model, but then there's damage that you can do about it.
But I think that brings up an excellent question. Again, for this, I think we need to have further conversation. Is that Longmont's role? Is that the city's role? Or is that Longmont Community Foundation's role? Right? To say, we're going to fund this upstart because, it's not taxpayer dollars. Now, you could argue both ways. You say it is the city of Longmont's role to fund these new, innovative, non-traditional, non-proven services, right? That have potential to deliver really great benefits for the residents of Longmont, but we don't know if they can or not. So that's a question for the board, I think, is, what is our role? Are we an incubator, or are we kind of the ones funding what we know will deliver the services that we need?
Well, I would argue any successful organization has some business development or R&D budget that you've got to grow in order to keep relevant. And I think I see funding some of these innovative agencies as part, like you have part of your budget, you're going to put a higher risk than the majority of it, 10%, 5%, whatever it is. Because those innovations may actually deliver tremendous services, but we don't know. So given that it's our job to steward public money to achieve the greatest impact, yeah, I'm like, why wouldn't we participate in seeing if some of these innovations can actually deliver greater impact than we're seeing otherwise?
The one thing that comes to mind for me is, and that really is what you're talking about there, Brian, is around the risk of it. An agency that has, is maybe unproven, or it's a unique program that comes in and asks us for $5,000. It's not the same as an agency. Like, our expectations of what their financial responsibility is shouldn't be the same as for an agency that's asking us for $105,000, right? Like, managing those two different things is very different. And so part of me wonders whether if staff is scoring the agency on the fiscal responsibility, then maybe if you're requesting above $50,000, you need a minimum staff score of X. And if you're under that, your minimum staff score has to be, X minus 10 or something like that, because the risk is lower because we're doing less money. I don't know if that's the right way to do it, but that's one way maybe that we want to think about it, is that is scaling, what we require in terms of fiscal responsibility in some way with the amount that we can give you.
Right. And I will say we did fund one agency, a new agency that is new to Longmont. They've been around, I think, $50,000 to provide, kind of outreach health services, right? So mental health services. And
that was new.
That was new to Longmont.
Yeah.
Right? And so
there's some precedent for taking some of that risk.
We are taking a huge risk, and we funded them at a very large amount. right? We funded them twice what another, these are Latinx serving agencies that we've been funding for years, and we funded them at twice the level. So, I mean, and we did it because that's what we were doing a formula, and they asked big and they scored enough, and that's what the formula said. So we followed the formula, and that's what the formula gets you sometimes.
Yeah, and to me, the formula has always been the starting point for an objective guideline. And I would expect there to be then nuanced thinking around how that, what the outcomes are and if we need to shift things. So that's an outlier.
And it's an outlier, yes, it's an outlier, yeah. I'm just pointing it out that did happen.
Yeah.
So back to this unintended reality of the disparities. So we've got recommendations: encourage more resources in the higher priority areas, housing stability being an example. Predetermined percentages, or look at that averages, the historical average, sort of back to that ceiling and floor and ways to do that. And then relative to the conversations on scoring new unproven agencies, sounds like it's really about performance history. And the other scoring things are really part of the overall scoring. I didn't hear anything other than performance history.
Well, but performance history is on the board side. I don't score performance. I tried to.
You don't score program performance.
I don't score program performance. I tried very hard. I read it, but I tried very hard to not let it interfere in the way, because I wanted to be as objective as possible and stick to my lane. And my lane was, are they financially sound? Is their request reasonable? I also happen to have the diversity question the board doesn't have. So do they have inclusive practices at the board level? Those are my main two. And also, are they being strategic? Are they demonstrated that they are thinking strategically about their agency? I stay at that level. So I don't look at program performance.
But you do look at organizational performance, right? I mean, all of that leads to organizational performance.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think so Caitlin's idea in my mind is that two-tier thing, right? She used it, so if you are asked, she used it less about you and more about how much they're asking for. If a smaller agency is only asking for 5,000, is my score that important, right? It is, or not that it's not that important, is do we
weight it less, or do we require
weight
a lower
differently?
level?
Right, exactly. Do we weight my score differently as staff? Or
overall, or for the new unproven agencies?
For the new unproven agencies, that's the way I'm hearing it.
So it's a little bit like underwriting loans, right? You're going to have a different underwriting set of criteria for $1 million loan than you are for a $5,000 loan. You're going to have the same idea of, like, I want somebody who's fiscally responsible. I want somebody who will pay the loan back. We want somebody who will use the funds wisely, but some of their governance might not be in order in the same way that a large organization would have. So we might be more character-based lending for a $5,000 loan than we would be, just strictly on FICO scores and all of that.
I'm loving your analogies tonight, Brian.
Somebody stop me.
Captured the other part of this conversation relative to new and unproven agencies around, are you an incubator? Is that your role as the Housing and Human Services Board or not? Can you look at a percentage that goes into research and development or innovation or whatever you want to call it? And then Caitlin's idea about scaling the risk. That there may be a way when you sit down to identify how you're going to do those 6 buckets, those 6 priorities.
7th bucket.
Well, or propose, when you get done with the review and you don't have enough agencies apply, or that you actually pull some money out, you call it your innovation because you didn't get enough for something else. I don't know, I'm making that up, but I'm just saying that could be a factor in your process, is looking at that innovation or that niche service.
Yeah.
Kimberly, I see the electronic hand.
Yeah, I just had a quick clarifying question. So, Eliberto, did you say we are not factoring your review of performance when we score?
We do, but what I was saying is you as a board member, you all look at program performance. So the way that our system works is now this past year, it was basically the average of me and Karen and the average of you all added together, gave us the total score. We removed the other weighting because we didn't see how that fit very well. And then those averages would say how much of, and I created ranges that the board chose, and whatever that total was, if it fit within that range, they would either get 70, no.
I think it was 80, 90, or 100% of their ask.
Okay, so it was based on their ask, not on our side. So up until now, it's always been based on their ask, not on a percentage that we set, or a ceiling that we set, or an average that we set. It's always been, this is where the disparities come in, that it's always been based on the agency side, their ask. And then we say, if you score high enough, you will get whatever, 190 and 80. Right?
Yeah.
And before we did 175 and 50.
So you're saying you might want to look at how much you base your decision on the ask?
Well, what we're saying is all the recommendations right now are going the other way, right? Whether it's a percentage, whether it's an average, whether it's a floor and ceiling, we are now, this board is now saying, this is what we're going to give you, right? This is, we are setting, by being transparent, announcing, assigning, we are shifting the balance of, I'm not calling it power, but we're shifting the balance of allocation away from the agencies and to us by saying, this is what you can grasp for. Where in the past, we didn't tell them what to ask for, and we based their funding on their score and our formula, which told us how much of their funding they would get, of their request. So that's the difference.
I mean, my question is, if we're not really using performance, like outcomes, in rating current or long established partners, then I don't think it's fair to preemptively devalue new startup organizations. It just seems like a arbitrary system that's not being consistent across the board. And I feel like if new organizations can, show competence in other areas where we're scoring, I don't think past performance should hold a lot of weight if we're not using it to judge. Yeah.
So to the past performance does come in the board evaluations.
Right.
So,
Right.
like some of the question is like, how well do their outcomes match what we're trying to do? How well do we think that they will essentially meet those outcomes, which is where like they, in their application, they share like, last year we served X number of people, we had a 93% like positive rating, like whatever that is, which, sort of the more established agencies tend to have more of that process and those types of numbers and that type of thing in their grant, whereas the new agencies just don't have it. And so like they're just kind of, it's almost like they're implicitly devalued because of that in many cases.
I don't remember how heavily we weighted it. I guess that's the key, is if it's not a huge part of our current system and it's not weighted that heavily, then I think we need to keep that in mind for the new.
So I would say, I think you do weight it, but you all weight it individually, and I can tell you that there are board members who everybody's perfect. And right, so it's perfect scores across, and I take the average of that. I will tell you in the past we have board members that, you know, say nobody's perfect and they give zeros all across the board. So, you know, this is why we take the average of all your scores to try and find a, you know, and then I can tell you that because Karen had so much knowledge that, you know, she would score some agencies based on her historical knowledge, and I would say, no, I don't know that much, I'm just gonna score what's on paper. And you would see huge disparities between me and Karen. But that's why we took an average. So I'm on my side, I got to figure out how I'm going to do that. So it's not just my scores alone. On the staff side, I might have to pull in division managers to help with that. So it's not just me.
So it seems like you all are kind of not in consensus about what to do with new unproven agencies in terms of that evaluation criteria. You have some really good ideas, but there isn't anything that's floating up as like the majority or a consensus decision. Sounds like there is disparity already between how the board scores the formula for the board and the formula for staff. It sounds like that board and staff are looking at some kind of history, whether it's performance history or organizational, foundational kinds of information. Is there any suggestion on what to do in a change kind of way relative to new and unproven agencies? Yeah.
But I would suggest that if we find ourselves with excess unallocated funds at the end of the year, that is the money that's allocated for this incubator, new and tried and tested as an option. Of course, if we do really good at solving that problem, we won't have any. But you know, if we end the year and there's $50,000 it's unallocated, instead of, you know, figuring out what to do, we just know, hey, that's the R&D budget.
I see a couple.
Oh, go ahead.
I said I see a couple of head nods, but I couldn't see those of you on camera very well. So I don't have a gauge.
I want to make Stacy or Deanna, do either of you have thoughts? I know I want to make sure that if you do, you can chime in.
I don't really have thoughts for the innovative ones and the new evaluations, just because I haven't been through it before. Yeah. I think with a little, like we're talking about averages in history, a little history goes a long way in this process.
Yeah. So one of my thoughts is that, you know, the 2 years that I've been on the board so far, you know, we do the hearings, and that's our opportunity where we ask questions, but really every board member is left to themselves to go and evaluate the agencies and to go through the system. And part of me wonders if there's some benefit in layering something on top of that. Eliberto, I see you raising your hand.
So part here, I was going to do this in another section in the announcements and in future agenda topics, but Karen and I, in our conversation, one thing that came out was, here's an idea. What if, she goes, we were talking about just how many, part of the challenge that you all have is that you're reading 40 some applications. She said, what if one way to address this is that we break you all in teams? So for example, if we are, you know, however, depending on how many you have, we could set 3 board members to just review housing stability and 3 board members to review and hold those, and then we come back and bring back our recommendations. That's an idea that might give you the bandwidth to do that deeper dive into the evaluation when you're not having to read 45 program applications.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it Karen does her best work after she retires? I don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say
I think it's time to sleep and think.
I like that idea.
I actually really like that because I also like the idea of being able to discuss it and not just like, and actually like get input from even like one other person of like going through and being like, hey, I noticed this. Did you notice that? Like, we don't do any of that. We bring it up in questions sometimes to the agencies, but we don't really discuss it until the scores come in. And then it's sort of like, we don't want to actually talk about the agencies because we want to do it based on the scores. And I feel like there's something that we're short shrifting in terms of our evaluation of them from that perspective. So I love that idea, Eliberto.
We'd have to, so if you did 3, we'd have to announce all your meetings, but we could do that. I mean, that's not a big deal.
And I think it would make the interviews more meaningful.
Yeah, if it was just 3 of you interviewing.
Well, yeah, because we'd have really focused kind of information we wanted to get during that period rather than, you know, just kind of brushing the surface.
So those of you on camera, are you this with that idea? That couple 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. It looks like
I think Robert gave us a 5th one.
Okay, it looks like that's something for you to work up.
Yeah, I'll work on that.
Okay. All right. So I've added possible R&D money over here. So
and we can come back to that one. Yeah, okay. We can come back to that.
So there was another question that was out there, which was, and Brian sort of alluded to this a little bit earlier. What's the role of this board in outreach to potential applicants?
My question would be, is it a conflict? Will we be accused of bias? Because we're reaching out to some and not others. And why didn't you reach out to me? I know you went to that guy. And that's.
So, and I've been rejected multiple times by this board and previous boards, but I'm gonna throw out my idea. And it can be rejected again. That's fine. So something to think about.
Quite the staging, Eliberto.
So I want the board to think about this. I said it at least since I started. I said it 3 times. Something to think about is if you want housing stability, and you know what programs, like you talked about earlier, you know, programs that you want. Why do we always just have an open application process and people bring us what they want instead of us saying we want case management that leads to housing, and we just put it out there and say this is what we want.
So basically an RFP.
An RFP version instead of an application version. I mean, that's just not to do it. I'm just and if we can make it hybrid, I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. We could do it by putting examples instead of making an RFP. We still make an open grant process, but say, and you know, housing stability. This is what it is, and here are some examples of programs that we are interested in funding.
What I like about the RFP idea is that it's very outcome focused.
Yes.
Right? It's like, here's what we want. How will you deliver that? It does put a lot of burden on us to accurately define the outcomes in a way that doesn't discourage, you know, like there might be great outcomes that we didn't even really think about. And it's like, oh, somebody did that. But I do like that focus.
Again, I'm saying that do an RFP, we just show examples. We could in our application guideline, we could say, here are some programs that we believe work. And we are very interested in funding these. And now we stay away from saying, here are the outcomes. And we just say, here are the things that we believe work, and we're interested in your application seeing that.
Is our needs assessment results that rich, you know, in the category of
housing
stability?
Yeah, Brian and I went through that. There's tons of stuff in that.
So we could just copy that language.
We have.
And then put that into the.
We have, but we haven't, we've just put it out there as information. We haven't said, here's what we'd like to see. So for example, there was, under self-sufficiency, there's car repair. we put it out there, but we never say, hey, we would be really interested in funding some sort of car repair program. It's just out there.
Yeah.
It's out there where?
In our application guide on the system.
So people aren't reading the application?
There's a lot of.
It's a big honking document.
Well, and I think they read the application with an idea of what they want to do versus what the opportunity is to provide a service, a benefit.
And when you score, do you score those things?
No, Michelle, why would we do
that? Just wondering.
You score the application.
Crazy.
Stacy.
So again, because I'm new, I had this thought, I don't know, 30, 45 minutes ago when we were talking. How do they know? Because I'm an informed citizen of Longmont. I have worked in social services in Longmont for over a decade now, and I had no idea that these were the priorities. And I have to assume that we figured these out through some study. I don't actually even know. And now I'm on the board. So how in the world would they know what we want? So, and Eliberto, I don't know any of the legalities or why we would go out and do RFPs or not, but I can't imagine how they would know, because I didn't. So.
Well, in the past, we haven't done it since COVID. We actually have had trainings. We would get folks together and say, here's our priorities, and we do it with Boulder County and the city of Boulder together. But not always. So the grant went to newer folks, probably didn't. But if they were always well attended by our traditional agencies that know the system. It's the newer folks that were always struggling with it.
Maybe like and I mean this sincerely, like an infographic, right? Like an easy visual way to understand would actually compel people to engage the information rather than scan looking for what they think they want to look for.
Well, the fact is that most of them come already with the program in mind. Do we fund that?
That's exactly right. I mean, most are going to look for how much money is there.
Right.
That's the biggest priority is what's my category, how much money is available.
Yeah.
And then how do I convince you that I'm actually delivering on what you want, whether I am or not.
That's been how it's worked. Doesn't mean it has to stay that way, but that's how it's been.
So back to the question, is the board responsible to outreach to agencies, or is the board interested in advising Eliberto on how to release information about the process? Because I heard conflict of interest. What about my bias if I go tap somebody? Versus we're interested in looking at how we get information out about the process differently. And then that falls to Eliberto and Erica, really.
So it's a marketing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm asking. So yes, Stacy.
So I mean, it's pretty clear to me. You just send a letter to everybody. You can't go and I don't think you can go and tap individuals. I think that is a conflict. Pretty direct one. But if you send a letter to everyone with, and it can easily go along with our whole mission of transparency, saying this is what we're doing this year. This is how the new model looks. And these are our top priorities. And here are the percentages that they will be funded in. And let people, and that way they don't have to read apparently a 300-page document and
take it that long.
So I hear the concern about a conflict. I generally don't think that when it's an open application to say to someone like, hey, this is we're the priority area is housing, and that's included in the information. If you have programs, like that's a great idea. Like, like pointing that out to them or, you know, that sort of thing. I don't see a conflict in that, because that is not giving them any preference or anything in terms of the evaluation or access to the board. Like, everybody has that access. I think as long as we are sending something to all of the agencies that we know of that have previously applied, agencies that are sort of like registered within the city of Longmont, I think as long as we do sort of a baseline, I don't think that, you know, if Deanna knows, you know, somebody at a nonprofit and just says like, hey, this is coming up, just so you know, the board is disclosing amounts and priority areas. I know you do something in housing. I think like you would be encouraged to apply. I don't see any like issue with that from a like ethical standpoint, because we're not giving them any like insider information or anything like that that would create the kind of conflict that I think folks might be concerned about. But I think we have to make sure we're doing that minimum, right? Like that, you know, if we're notifying any agency that's within the city of Longmont or that we know of that services Boulder County, then I think we've done sort of the baseline due diligence to make sure that that additional outreach is not problematic.
But I just want to make clear, we send it out to those who have funded, who've been funded in the past. We put it in the paper. I don't know all the agencies that are registered in Longmont. We don't have the capacity to do that.
Okay.
But we put it out through all our social media. We do on the website. We do, yeah, but we do send it out to anyone who's applied that's in the system, but we don't go out and search every registered Longmont nonprofit.
What we might be able to do is, if there's any, Graham, you might know this, like any agencies like thinking about housing in particular, where we have these high need areas with low responses, is there like a Colorado Housing Development Alliance or something like trade groups, right, that represent a number of builders and developers, and make sure that they are aware of this, that they can share it with their members. So something like that.
Yeah, that'd be fine. Again, we do our due diligence as much as we can. We just don't have the capacity to find every small 501c3 in Longmont that's providing human services. That's just not, I just don't have the capacity to do that.
So I kind of hear two things. One is, with the change in approach to some things, there is a really good reason to sort of package the information and get it out. Right. Look at some areas where some potential applicants might be, and Alberto will work on that. And then I hear what Caitlin's saying is minimal. You're out and about, hey, did you know the funding process opened? Is a reasonable kind of gateway approach. But it's not, I'm going to sign up to research all of the nutrition programs and I'm going to go tap them as a board member, right? We're not doing that. It's the minimal approach. Is that what folks are comfortable with? Moving to transparency, we've got to figure out how to do that. So that's that public information side. No active outreach by the board. That's what.
Right. So it's more circumstantial than like targeted. Than
proactive and out there. Is that right? Yes, yeah, folks.
I certainly think the board, as ambassadors of human services and community development at Longmont, should be doing that anyway.
So I wonder if an informal newsletter, you know, and maybe we just do this annually from now on, is just, hey, here's our priorities and our buckets and our average spending, and it'll meet these goals. We want a transparency and not just to bury a paragraph added to this less than 300-page document.
Well, no, we do that every year.
We do
on our website.
No. What has it said the last 4 years? I don't even know we did this.
Well, it says what our priorities are. We've never been transparent about how much. That's what's happening tonight. But we've always said, here's our priorities. Here are the eligibility requirements. That's all, every year. That's on the website as soon as the process is open.
I see.
Kimberly.
You know, the utility pamphlet that comes with our bill every month? is that an appropriate place to just have a quick little blurb about opening up this process? Because everybody in the city of Longmont gets that. And that would be a huge blanket. I don't know. What do you think?
Not if you don't pay your, like, apartment folks may not, if they're not the ones that are paying them, but yeah.
That's true.
Doesn't the city put like announcements in the rec guide each season?
I love that idea.
We could talk to our recreation folks.
Yeah, marketing, Alberto.
We can talk to our marketing folks.
That one's assigned.
Yeah. All right. So I'm looking at the time. It's 8:30.
And I think I'm done with the questions that I had.
So I got a lot of work ahead of me. That's good.
Good job, Michelle.
So
Michelle.
I think you all had it work. You just needed to get packaged. Maybe you'd already done the thinking.
We just needed you to sign it. That was probably really good.
Well, she's my new boss, so.
Oh, yeah, right.
All right.
1 month. Retiring June 3rd. So following in Karen's footsteps.
That's why he said that the capacity, he doesn't have the capacity to do all of this stuff. And it's so true. The entire city right now, they don't really have the capacity to do above and beyond, although they do it every day, you know? So I think it's important to be mindful of that too.
I think that's a good piece of information in terms of like the last question of like open application versus RFP, is that, you know, in terms of capacity and so forth, I think I love the idea of doing something with an RFP. And I also recognize that that is a huge ask, and it's a huge burden on both the board and staff. And so I think that part of the reason we haven't done that is because it's a big ask.
Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna move on if that's right with you, Caitlin, to the I want to actually in March or April. Thank you, Michelle. I give a report on one of our funding efforts for housing stability, and that's our homesteading program. And I'm not sure if you've given me permission, Erica, to share my screen. Okay, so I want to share my screen, and I want to go quickly over it because I know we are moving, and I have some announcements that I need the board to hear. So
you're not retiring, right?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm too young to retire. No, yeah. We'll get there.
Do I need to stay?
Well, I think you know them all.
Oh, okay, okay. Good night.
Good night.
All right,
Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna move this. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
All right, so I will go pretty fast through this. So this is a combination 2021 year-end report for homesteading and also the first quarter. We have some numbers for the first quarter, and they've told me some things that they're concerned about too. All right, so there we go. So just a quick background for our new board members. Homesteading was launched in April of 2018 as a part of our coordinated response to the 2017 Human Services Needs Assessment, which prioritized homelessness and homelessness prevention services. So the board took part of the human services funding, $200,000 to be exact, and said, we want this specifically for homeless prevention. So we put an RFP out there, and the R Center got that RFP. And since then, we've been working with them. So in 2021, they served 53 households. 14 of those households were able to reach the goal of saving 1 month of rent. And I will say that that has dropped from before the pandemic. Before the pandemic, they had a higher percentage of families able to reach that 1 month goal of rent. And I think part of that is the cost of rent going up. Part of it is the pandemic effect on wages and jobs. They spent a total of $111,000. They get $120,000 for direct financial assistance. They underspent it by about $8,000 something. The things they spent on, the majority you can see is on rent. some utilities and some other, and that could be all sorts of things, fixing stuff, could be all sorts of things. They did say that of the 53 participants, 5 continue to access our center services, and that means potentially housing or other services. 2 have moved to other cities for affordability issues, and that is a trend that I have seen. And 1 has moved out of state. So the rest of the families, they believe, have not lost their housing. Here's what we know in 2022 so far. They've assisted 22. 1 has saved. That's how much they spent. You can see most of it has been on rent. They're concerned right now. So here's what, just for the board to know, there's a lot of federal money going to rental assistance. And so even some of their other housing programs aren't getting utilized as much because everybody's qualifying for what's called the ERAP, Emergency Rental Assistance Program. That is federal money. And so the county and the state are trying to utilize that money as quickly as possible before it gets, there's this term in federal funding called clawback, before it gets clawed back. So they're trying to get that money out. And so there is a little bit of concern this year of not that the need has diminished, but that the resources have multiplied, right? So there's other wells to drink from.
And it's temporary.
And it's temporary, and it's a lot of money, and we want to get it out. Yeah. So there is, I did talk to Angela and Felicitas, and there is a little concern about, can we meet our numbers? Because I think the goal is 48 families a year, 48 households. We've met it every year. We've gone above and beyond it every year. There is some concern this year. So I just want to put that on your radar. Yes, Ryan.
Is there a possibility that they could carry over? I would just imagine that federal funding is going to go away, and then they're left with trying to carry this increased kind of load. Might they be able to carry over?
They have been, because even when they don't, so Felita says that most of this money that they spent in the first quarter has been carried over.
Oh, okay.
So they do get to carry over, which is good. We don't ask for it back, which is good. They get to use it, but they're just concerned about meeting their goals, right?
Oh, I see.
They're concerned
that they would be judged negatively.
Right, exactly. Yeah, because there is a concern that they won't meet their goals this year. They do a survey, and we changed our budget. We allowed them to use money that we provide for incentives. So you can see the dollar amounts: $20 for an exit survey, $40 for 6 months. And I think it's wonderful they're doing $60 for a 2-year survey. I think 2-year data is the most amazing data. That if you can get that data, it's gold. It's worth its weight in gold. In 2021, 13 of the 53 clients filled it out. So that's around 25%. If you know anything about data, that 25% is pretty standard for social services surveys. So it's not the best, but it's not bad either. Here's some of the things that came out, which I think are important. On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not helpful, 5 being very helpful, how helpful was the program in keeping you in your current housing? Everybody said it was so helpful. Do you feel prepared about future? I don't sound just 100% said yes. Now what's interesting is it's less, and I think it's because of the cost of housing. I think that's why we get a little different answer under, do you feel confident you will remain in your current housing for the foreseeable future? I think folks are thinking about, I got to find a different place. I got to downsize. I got to move. I think that's why we didn't get the 100%.
It's not a reflection of the program, not
it's a reflection
what it needs.
Right. I think it's a reflection of our housing reality. So that's the presentation. Nice job. I don't know if you guys have any questions. I work monthly with them to analyze their data. I ask them questions, what trends they're seeing. On a good note, a trend that we came up today is, and we're seeing it in there's a program that Erica helps run that's coming out of our HCI program, or Housing Community Investment, that Molly runs, called Fresh Start. It's a utility billing assistance program. And what we're seeing is that, I'll stop sharing, that they're seeing less applicants because, and so is the R Center. So people are, and we're waiting on a report from ETS, our IT, to see how many folks are delinquent. But it feels that we've been making a dent on this issue. They've given out, I asked the Art Center, they've given out, close to 200,000. We've given out close to 150,000. There's still a big issue, but I think we are making some progress.
Excellent.
So I'm not sure if the board has any questions on homesteading or yeah.
How many of the families are repeat year over year?
That's a great question. I'll have to ask. I don't know. But you only get to use it once a year, so I'm assuming, and my educated guess, it's very little, because this program really focused, like that you saw to those that take the financial education. This program really focuses on helping people be prepared for that next financial challenge. And I will say the majority of financial challenges that come are primarily health related, loss of income due to some sort of health. It's not always COVID, it could be cancer, it could be all sorts of stuff. But those are that trend has continued over the last few years. And single parents. Single parents are very stretched and a lot. So those make up the majority of these clients. And so any hiccup in a single parent's income that they need to be out for a medical reason, and then that sets them back, months. So those are the continuing trends of need.
In regards to the Our Center concern about the Optive Sun, their current performance, how would they be penalized for that? Would that be part of our evaluation? We'd look back and say, you said you were going to do this and you did that.
It'd be the board, it'd be me, it'd be us.
So that's just a note.
Right. Yeah, because I present to you all every year how they're doing. Right?
Are they working with any of that federal funding?
Oh yeah, they're sending people left and right. They're trying to get them through the process. I mean, our staff is doing that too, actually. At community services, Erica and Jasmine are working. If somebody comes in, we try and help out as much as we can, get them through the process so they can get. It's a lot of money.
So maybe those numbers could be something of a proxy, an add-on for, different source of funding. But here's what we did in the interest of this program, taking advantage of this different source. Okay.
Is it common, and this is just from my recollection, it's for this, I mean, the highest priority really is around rent, because if folks can't make rent, the utilities and other things don't really make a whole lot of difference. And is it just that we allow them flexibility in terms of where that money is spent? And so they occasionally have that, but rent is really housing prices are what's torpedoing most people right now. And if they can get housing done, then the rest of it seems relatively easy.
Right. Yeah, rent is a priority, but we do, when this program was created, we wanted to have flexibility because it could be something else. I'll give you an example. If what's keeping you from earning the income to cover your rent is car repair, this money could be used to fix your car so you can go to work so you can pay the rent. Typically, rent is what they ask for, but it has that level of flexibility that if it's something, I'll give you an example. In order to keep someone housed in a mobile home that they own, we used some of this money to cover their property taxes because they hadn't paid them. They didn't know they had them. And so we helped pay their back property taxes so they could stay, so they could keep their home. So we've done that.
Got it.
Yeah, and I know that landlords are definitely going up on rent everywhere because they can.
Right.
There's no inventory.
Yeah.
So that's my report.
All right. Any other questions for Eliberto? All right. We are nearing the end of our time here. Last item is announcements and other business.
So I have a couple. One sad one. Kaylee knows about this. I see Robert's hand as well. And Stacy. So I'll be quick. I received a call from Karen Phillips and she unfortunately has had to resign due to health issues. And unfortunately, the other unfortunate piece is we missed the opening for the mid-year recruiting. So I went and asked Michelle Gomez at City Clerk, and she's like, no, you guys are, this recognition came in a little bit too late. And so we're going to be down a person until we have the end of the year recruitment piece. And then the other announcement I have, and then I'll let everybody else do theirs, I was in another difficult conversation a couple of days ago, or yesterday actually, with Together. This board had allocated the remaining funding to fund all their outreach, because we've seen the effectiveness of street outreach and it has been very effective. Well, Together is not immune from the Great Resignation. And they lost several team members of this 3-member team. They lost 2 of them. And they basically came to me yesterday and said, we are struggling so much to hire that we cannot in good faith sign this contract. So we are now, and I'll come back to the board, there is a lot of conversations. I'm talking to Harold, talking to a whole bunch of people. How do we continue this speed outreach effort? Because we know that it's needed and helpful. But I just want to let the board know that that money that we had allocated is back in our coffers, because they just didn't feel they could sign the contract in good faith. So that are my 2 difficult announcements, but we're gonna work through it. And unfortunately, I do have a card for Karen, but there's only 4 of us here. Kaylee, is it okay if we sign it from the whole team? Or
yeah,
okay.
I think that'd be great. Thank you so much.
Okay, those are mine.
Okay, Robert.
Abbott and I are scheduled to evaluate together attention homes. And unfortunately, I have some relatives coming to visit, and they expect me to be their tour guide, I think, or explainer of everything anyway. In any case, it's from the 26th of April to the 3rd of May. And I just want to say that I could probably get away, but it would be easier if we could schedule the evaluation after the 3rd of May. Is that possible?
Yeah, you can work with Erica. Erica does all the scheduling. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm out of town that week as well. So don't worry about it, Robert. I think we will manage to figure out a time that will work for that. Okay,
just email me. I'm free the rest of the month, so I can get away at any time.
Stacy.
So just other business. I wasn't on the calendar, but Eliberto and I did go to see El Comité, and I have a report from that. If anybody wants to stay now, or I can just get on the agenda for next month. Totally up to you guys. I can just take 2 minutes and go through it quick, or just get on the agenda.
Let's do it for next month.
Okay.
If that's okay with you.
No problem.
I know stretching it sometimes is a little difficult, but I also see a little bit of weariness from our long conversations. So let's get it in for next month, and I will make sure that we get that. Thank you for flagging that, Stacy.
No problem.
Any other announcements or other business? All right, in that case, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Does anyone want to? All right, Robert is moving to adjourn. Do we have a second? All right, Kimberly is seconding. See you all in a month.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.